How's that? Somebody give me a thumbs up and let me know if the sound is here. Well, the great thing is we really weren't talking much about nothing. We're just letting people come in. Um, going to get somebody just a second. See if they can say we've got sound. In fact, let me pull up something here. I'll check myself and see if we have sound now. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, there we go. There we go. Great. We got sound. All right. So, well, for those of y'all that can't read lips, I'm just going to give a quick little overview. So, tonight we are talking about kind of like a part two of our video series from last week. So, it's bad enough to get a subscription model for managing your disease. It's even worse whenever it turns out you got the wrong subscription. There are a lot of illnesses today that doctors or the medical system itself is increasingly saying is atypical, idiopathic. We don't really have a reason, or not a reason, we don't really know why these things are happening. And that causes a lot of problems because whenever you go to see a doctor, you have this kind of expectations that they're going to be able to at least accurately tell you what's going wrong, what systems are messed up. You would think too that they give you a reason why, like here's your root causes, although I find that that just does not happen. And so we're going to identify a lot of the, I would say, the actual diseases or the actual dysfunction that masquerades as many of our common and our serious health conditions. And it's pretty eye opening. Most people, as they come to my practice, they've seen 5 plus, sometimes it's a ridiculous amount of specialists. And they usually always come with the same story. I don't know what's wrong with me. My doctors didn't really know what was wrong with me. Sometimes they were in the ballpark, but they didn't really know how to put together some protocol where I actually got any type of healing. And that's becoming a lot more and more common. So I've got some case studies, I've got some anecdotes that we're going to talk about tonight, uh, because there's a lot of things that masquerade. And probably some of these are going to be very relevant to you. So we're going to be covering things from, more your common things like high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, to more intense things like Alzheimer's, dementia, mental health problems, neuropathy, gut problems, cancer, and other things. And we're going to find that there's a lot of root causes that mimic many of these illnesses. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. Um, I've got a presentation. Not sure if I'm going to pull it up, but I'm going to be referring back to this because I want to make sure that we do this thoroughly. In fact, I'll go ahead and just pull up the presentation just so we've got a visual. And feel free, anybody that wants to chime in to the chat, it'd be nice to make these more discussion instead of just listening to me ramble all night. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Come on now. There we go. Okay. So, what happens when you have the wrong disease? So, we get a lot of people, as I said earlier, that have some chronic illness and there's not really a diagnosis for it. We'll call them junk diagnoses. A lot of things that's becoming more of a popular term now. We would say junk diagnoses could be anything from fibromyalgia or anything that has what we call atypical or idiopathic. Atypical means it's not normal. Idiopathic, we kind of get the term idiot, not knowing. We don't know what is causing this, but it presents as it kind of presents similar to this. So we're going to give it this. Now, this kind of implies that there's no type of definitive lab tests that are able to tell us. We're not able to pin some disease onto a marker. Unfortunately, a lot of illnesses people have today, and doctors aren't running labs that can identify those root causes. I um, always talk about toxicity as a root cause, and the toxin labs that will run, those are going to become very relevant tonight. So, this problem, we have symptom based diagnoses that really don't understand root cause. And then there's the consequence of that is people, they get labeled, but there's never any healing. It's like, okay, I have an identification now, but what does that do for me? I mean, that's assuming that you even have the right label. If you're mislabeled and you get treatment for something that you don't even have, well, that makes things a lot worse. So, we're going to start with some of the biggest problems that I would say the vast majority of people are dealing with in some capacity, and that is mold toxicity and Lyme disease. Mold toxicity, nobody's immune from this. You get water damage in your house, in your car, in your workplace. This is going to become a big problem. And I haven't labeled the great mimickers for a reason, because you're probably going to be shocked to see what mold and Lyme do to people. I see a lot of folks that have this. We have lab tests that can definitively tell us if this is a problem and to what extent we're getting, to what extent these infections are, or this toxicity, because mold's not necessarily an infection, it's more of a mycotoxin poison. Lyme itself is an intracellular parasite. Depending on what it is, there's a number of co-infections. It could be a parasite, it could be a really nasty bacteria, but it causes a lot of problems. But we're going to find that these root causes can mimic so many different diseases. So a lot of people that have chronic fatigue syndrome, a lot of people have fibromyalgia, we can point it back to some type of biotoxin illness from one of these. Essentially, they're getting a ton of inflammation from these particles that are damaging any tissue that it comes into contact with. A lot of them are fat loving, so that if they get up into the brain, they can cause brain issues. They get down to your digestive tract, they can wreck it. Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, IBS, IBD, you name it. If they get into the kidneys, chronic cystic kidneys, mold toxicity itself is highly liver toxic, highly kidney toxic. It's also neurologically toxic. So we're looking at neuropathies. We're looking at Alzheimer's and dementia, brain fog, seizures too. And a lot of these terms that I just said, you're going to hear them pop up with a lot of these. It's not just mold and Lyme that do this, but these are some of the common, like, epidemic level that people are dealing with. There also is a quarter of the population that has um what was it HR, LRA, or DQ. And there's a certain specific type of genetic SNP that some people are make them supposedly more predisposed to getting it. We can run tests for that. I don't worry about it so much, but it can help determine, why some people just get really knocked out by this so quickly. So let's just talk about common misdiagnoses of mold. So we have kind of the physical side, and then we have the mental side. So we already mentioned fibromyalgia. Anytime you hear chronic fatigue, I'm going to be thinking there's some type of biotoxin illness. And biotoxin illness is essentially that's going to be a poison from a bacteria, a fungus, or a parasite. Multiple sclerosis. This one I have found is a huge junk diagnosis, because mold can cause a lot of the symptoms that look like MS or a lot of your sclerosis type of things. And so there was somebody I was actually just talking to this past week, um, who has a documented history of mold exposure in the house that made him extremely sick. And then they were given kind of a tossed around thing. Well, maybe you have MS. And talking with this person, it's like this this is the same story that I always hear. So there's a very big correlation between people that are have to get MS rooted out or who can even get diagnosed with this and then never look to see what their mycotoxin exposure is because they could be sky high in certain mold toxins like ochratoxin A or varicarin, um, or trichothecenes, stachybotrys, chitoglobacin. These are some really, really, really nasty mycotoxins that again can damage your liver, can damage your brain, can damage your nervous system. Um, we can't rule out Parkinson's. We can't rule out many of these neurological functions because a lot of times mold toxicity can just mimic all of these things. Irritable bowel syndrome, IBD. I'll even say liver cirrhosis, gallbladder attacks, pancreatic problems, spleen problems. And the list kind of goes on and on, whatever you can think of. Mold is just that destructive to the body. People really don't have an understanding of just how destructive mold is. It's not just allergy, it's not just a respiratory issue. I see a lot of mold happens to be a lot more psychiatric and neurological. I've dealt with people that have suicidal ideation from mold, depression and anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. PTSD is actually a very common one that happens. People get so much damage in their body so quickly that it causes the body to go into a state of nervous system shock, and they'll develop PTSD or PTSD, which we call chronic PTSD, where people lose their ability to function. They lose their emotional resiliency. Um, they lose all of their energy. They can't function. They can't hold down a job. They can't do anything. And it's all from mold. And when we're able to successfully detox that, we find people are able to come back. Their emotional stability, they get emotionally stable, they get mentally stable, their cognitive faculties come back, the brain fog is completely lifted. They're able to hold pens and write. Their gait is coordinated where they can walk and not fall down. They don't get they don't they don't pass out when standing up. We call this POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. And this is really common with those that end up getting mold or Lyme, and seizures too. We can see reduction of these things. So what I'm getting at is we have to understand that in this toxic world that we live in, most of the time, all of our illness that we're dealing with is just simply being poisoned. And that poisoning not only affects our physical body, but also affects our mental and emotional function as well. Yeah, and I see on here I was diagnosed with MS before the mold exposure. Uh, th- so we're going to get into that too. I think a lot of times it's not going to be just mold itself, or things don't get so bad before somebody finally identifies mold as a possible culprit. Um, Let me see if I've already got this on here because I'm going to tell you a little story about how mold has finally been recognized in the medical system. It was resisted for quite a while. Um, but kind of going back over the psychiatric manifestation. I've got it here where the exclusive psychiatric manifestations, I already talked about the hallucinations, psychosis. I've actually got a case study about psychosis, which I'll mention here in a second. The brain fog, the memory issues, the concentration, the attention deficits, the vestibular sense, your balance, all that stuff can easily go out the window. Also, vision can change rapidly where you can't tell differences in light. And then you can also become extremely photosensitive and auditory sensitive, where you get scared, you get freaked out, you feel vulnerable and violated by intense sound, by intense visuals. And this is where seizures can start to come into play because those mold toxins cause such stress to the brain and damage to the cells that they can manifest a lot of times as those neurological, like seizures. So I've got a case study. This was a conference that I was at, and this was a doctor who runs Total Tox. They run a lot of mycotoxin panels. They do a lot of the detox protocols that I do as well. And they were talking about a patient of theirs who came to them because it was, it was an older person who was dealing with a lot of cognitive decline, just in a real bad place. And what was identified were high levels of mold toxicity. What was interesting is that I don't remember if it was their primary care or it was it was a medical doctor that they were also working with, different practice, not related to this practitioner, that took that information and ended up saying, okay, so it looks like we got mold toxicity, and end up giving them antifungal meds, things like nystatin, diflucan, um, trying to think of the other itraconazole, some of these things that y'all may have been put on before in the past. And, they do kill yeast, but when you kill yeast, you tend to liberate a lot of toxins, particularly heavy metals and radioactive particles, but there are plenty of others too. Yeast is interesting that, and in, it's like it's trying to metabolize these poisons in your body so it'll grow, and it'll kind of encapsulate it in a matrix and hold on to it. And when you kill the yeast, a lot of these toxins get liberated. And it's actually one reason why you see consistent fungal problems in people, is because they're so toxic that the fungus is there, um, is essentially eating this or trying to metabolize it. Anyways, what happened with this person is by giving them the antifungals and killing the yeast, it stirred up so much toxicity that it induced a state of psychosis in this poor patient. And so, what the practitioner with this case study had to do was, um, first off, I believe the patient stopped taking the antifungal, and this practitioner worked with them doing drainage. So they were working on their liver. They were working on trying to get their detox pathways opened up so that they could flood a lot of this poison out. And then they used binders. And any of y'all that watch me know I talk a lot about drainage and binders. And by using binders that were able to mop up a lot of these mold toxins and other things, eventually, these persons flare up, their symptoms calm down. They were able to become lucid again. They came out of the state of psychosis. And then over time, they were able to successfully detox and show before and afters of these high levels of mold toxins, and then show that either they zeroed out or they were well into the green. So it just goes to show that you can induce a lot of sickness in people just um, by virtue of these poisons being in the body and being mobilized. In this person's case, they went into psychosis. They didn't know who they were. It was, tons of inflammation. Um, I don't remember if this one had violent behavior, but you get the point. And this is stuff that I see pretty often. This is what happens with people that have mold to varying extents. So let's see if we have anything else on mold. Before I get into Lyme, I'll go ahead and tell you a little story on mold. For the longest time, biotoxin illnesses or toxicity really wasn't considered the main focus, or even a focus for medicals system. I kind of look out like a redheaded stepchild. Back in the 2000s, you had a doctor named Richie Shoemaker, and he found, I believe it was called the red tide. Anyways, there was a lake, and you had there was this Fisteria was outbreaking, and you had the tides were turning red, and essentially something got into these fish and was killing them. They were bacterial toxins, and people were getting a lot of these symptoms that we classically see with mold. Anyway, it was thanks to people like Richie Shoemaker, who was able to document, was able to find a lot of the inflammatory triggers that were not on the radar of the medical system, because mold and Lyme trigger much stranger, and I would say deeper levels of inflammation that you're not getting from, your regular blood work. Your CRP, your C reactive protein can be completely fine, and you are dying from mold toxicity or Lyme. So it was thanks to him doing all this documented research that finally I don't remember how many years later, you started getting the medical system to acknowledge a condition called SIRS. I don't have it on here, but I want you to be aware of it. It's a junk diagnosis, in my opinion, too, because it just says chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Doesn't tell me anything I already don't know. And but at least SIRS is associated with, we know it's coming from, or it has that connotation of coming from some type of environmental poison. So at least we have that. But if you ever hear or see anything about SIRS, then you can go look up this that we're talking about. And at least if you have a doctor that's aware of that, that's a good starting point. Now, SIRS can also be from Lyme as well, which is what we're going to get into here. A lot of y'all have heard of Lyme. A lot of y'all probably have gone down the conspiracy route of Lyme being a weaponized bioweapon, and natural um, Lyme having, I don't remember if it's like 32 or 40 genes. And if there's like a synthetic genetic warfare variant Lyme that, or genetically modified Lyme that has like 800 genes. I'm not going to talk about that one tonight, but I am going to talk about Lyme disease is becoming a lot more prevalent in people, um, maybe subclinical, but I would say it's always playing a part in there. And glyphosate, the main ingredient in Roundup, or pesticides, herbicides, and other stuff, they're driving the epidemic and making it a lot worse. And then you add EMF into the mix, and that drives it and makes it a lot worse too. Now, Lyme disease also mimics so many diseases, um, blood pressure problems, blood sugar problems, um, heart palpitations, a lot of heart problems, burning feet. So people end up feeling like they've got gout or neuropathy. Certain Lyme co-infections, Bartonella or Babesia, can cause a lot of these things, as well as a lot of psychological manifestations. And so I have it on here: neuroinflammation, autonomic dysfunction, altered pain signaling. And you get the same mechanisms as fibromyalgia, MS, and psychiatric stuff. I do deal with a number of people who have Lyme, and they have some really, really, really unique struggles. It's very hard for them to tolerate anything, and they get sent around all the time in the medical system as MS, fibromyalgia, or um, heart conditions, something like that. It's not good, and there's usually no real. There's no. It's not just there's no answers. There's usually nothing that they can do that makes them feel better. If you try to go after these bugs and actually kill them, like an antibiotic or anti-parasitic, it doesn't end well. It can send people into the hospital. It can completely ruin them and make them become incoherent in some cases for days, weeks at a time. So we have to be very careful in dealing with this. So we see depression, anxiety, bipolar like swings, and severe psychosis. And then a lot of times, standard line panels. They're not that great. We use line panels that measure alternative criteria in addition to CDC, because the CDC traditional stuff just doesn't cut it. Now, there's a lot more stuff that goes on in mold and Lyme, but these really do take up um, a lot of the talk because they're so prevalent and people don't know it. And so it's worthwhile for us to investigate that, especially the mold toxicity side, because if you've ever lived in a moldy apartment or in a bad workplace or had floods or had a piping break, and then if you feel worse when you're in those places, and then you feel a lot better when you leave that situation, those mold toxins themselves, once they get into your body, they are notoriously difficult for your body to remove. They can get reabsorbed. So it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. You really can't get them out well. And they'll poison the gallbladder, they'll sludge it up, they'll cause the gallbladder and the liver to back up, get stagnant, causes other issues in the stomach. And that's just for the normal population. For certain others, they get it real bad. Yeah, and I see all of this information here, diagnosed with MS in 30s, and then 50, and then in your 50s when exploded with mold. Yeah, this is really common too. And what that tells me, at least from my perspective, because I deal, with this stuff day in and day out, is it's not just again, mold is really prevalent, but it's not just that. We're going to get into the other things too. And the older you are, there are some poisons today that our generation doesn't deal with that the older generation dealt with. And it causes some real problems. And I think we're coming up on that here. Let's talk about a good one, mercury. Mad Hatter's disease. That's what it was famously called, and for good reason. Hatters used to use that in the making of their little hats. And mercury has a low state of matter shift. So we know at room temperature, mercury is liquid. And when it gets hot enough, which is not that hot, I don't remember what the specific temperature is, but let's just say it's hot enough for a cup of coffee or a cup of tea to cause it to vaporize. Anyway, you put it in hats, and then the mercury runs down and starts absorbing into your skin. Your brain's right here. It's a recipe for disaster. Many people would absolutely go crazy. Now, there are a number of metals that when they start getting into the brain or the nervous system, they wreak absolute havoc. And they hurt really bad trying to come out too. So, for detoxing these things has to be done low, slow, and very methodically with a lot of emphasis on drainage support. Otherwise, they can get stuck or they can hurt on their way out mentally, emotionally, and physically. So, mercury, we've known about a lot of the problems with mercury for a while. So, you've got some historical syndromes, erethism, it's behavioral changes, irritability, depression, social withdrawal. These are things whenever the brain is on fire or the brain is highly inflamed. Whenever you get sick, your personality can change a little bit. You get the flu, the body aches, you don't have any energy to do anything. You will gladly cancel something and withdraw from society because you just do not feel yourself. Okay, crank that up about 100 times, and then you feel vulnerable and you feel paranoid. That's what a lot of these things we're talking about can do to, especially if they get into the brain and the nervous system. And it's a real big modern reality. I mean, they're in dental amalgams. So if you got silver fillings, this mercury is really close to your sinuses and really close to your brain. And mercury likes to off gas. Every time you drink a cup of coffee, you drink something hot, it's aerosolizing, vaporizing tiny bits. And those are getting absorbed into the tissues, which can get absorbed into the bloodstream, can get absorbed into the sinuses because of proximity. It can get up into the brain because these toxins, most of these toxins are fat loving. That means that they have an affinity to get into your fat tissue. And your brain is a fat organ. And so we do see a lot of mercury toxicity with people, whether they know it or not, especially if you're not running the right test. We see a lot of people's health problems arise from just dental amalgams alone. And so, for mercury toxicity alone, it can poison the gut. It can completely screw up the microbiome, leading to all sorts of diseases, whether it's IBD, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, cancer. And the reality is, nobody's looking for these poisons. And certainly, you're not being put on protocols or you're not doing protocols to get these things safely out of your system. So if they're never addressed, they're never moved, they just wreak havoc in your body, poison the cells, and lead to further progressions of disease over time. And then you wonder, why do I have cardiovascular problems? Why do I have heart disease? Well, maybe it's because you have mercury that is, has been deposited or is continually poisoning you, getting into your brain, messing with your nervous system, causing possibly neuropathy, or, kind of insert the disease. A lot of these, we call them mimickers for a reason because when they poison everything that they touch. And depending on where it gets lodged in your body, it can damage that system. So it could look like liver problems. It could look like kidney problems. It depending on the poison, it can look like a musculoskeletal problem or a connective tissue problem. Glyphosate is notorious for connective tissue problems and finding Lyme disease within people's joints. So mercury, well known to have psychiatric stuff, major depressive disorders because it messes with neurotransmitters. Bipolar disorder, um, again, a lot of these are going to work on parts of the brain. So just if you've never dealt with mercury or known that you've dealt with mercury and started to detox, it can mess with this. It can also mess with erections. You can get erectile dysfunction from heavy metal poisoning. I see that. And I can just tell you, even personally, detoxing mercury and other things is not fun. It'll mess with your emotions. It'll mess with your sexual function. It can mess with your heart. It can mess with your gut. It can mess with your nervous system. You know, you don't walk straight, can't think straight, eyesight goes weird. And then we see the bigger things, neurodegeneration. So we have a linear association between blood mercury levels and depressive symptom scores. Now, great thing is we've got tests for this. I've got multiple tests that we can do for mercury itself to see where it is, if it's in the tissues, if it's in the blood, is it organic mercury, is it inorganic mercury? So we can tell if it's what type of mercury you got, and maybe try to figure out where those sources are, and then come up with a detox plan. So we got plenty of other ones too. Parasites make their own toxins. Parasites can mimic so much stuff. Pretty much everything that I just said. A lot of neurological, a lot of psychiatric stuff. Certainly a lot of gut problems and cancers. Maybe y'all have heard before parasites and mold toxicity get labeled as cancer. I think, if you recall, we talked about parasites before. We thought there was cancer, and the picture showed it was a parasite nest that uh, like a cyst up in the brain. That it turns out they opened it up, it was a parasite nest. Or same thing with the sinus cavities. Now, if you look up Hulda Clark was an interesting natural doctor who had said a lot of cancers, according to her clinical experience, were caused by certain types of parasites. And I'll say certainly that's true. I wouldn't say that is definitively all the time only what they are, but it is there. It is a part of it. Heavy metals we just talked about. We've got lead, we've got arsenic. Interesting thing that happened with lead, and I believe this was from. Give me a second, because I want to get it right. I believe this was from a Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. He's a naturopathic doctor. He wrote a book called Toxin Solution, and in that book, he recounted a case study of a lady who had come to him who had lead poisoning. She didn't necessarily know that she had it, but he was able to help her figure that out. What had happened is her water got contaminated with lead, and she was cooking tea as usual. She was boiling tea, and instead of refilling the pot every time she was making tea, she had a big pot, and when you boil the pot, there's leftover water. So she would just keep reboiling the leftover water in there. And what happens is lead does not evaporate into the air when um, when you boil water. So the lead kept concentrating and concentrating. She ended up having a lot of inflammation in the eye and went and just had total visual loss all of a sudden. Doctors didn't know what to do. She came to him. He determined, you've got some lead poisoning. Your water's contaminated. Apparently, they were doing some work in her area, and lead had gotten into, we'll just say lead had gotten into her water. And so, by him putting her on a lead specific or heavy metal detox protocol, she was able to get her eyesight back. It went back to normal in just a matter of weeks. And they were able to help the body get the lead out. And this is stories that I hear. And these are things that, me as a practitioner have to look out for, because when you say that somebody all of a sudden goes blind and loses vision, there's a reason for that. And if you're able to say, okay, it's through a poison, it's through a contaminant, and then you are able to do a protocol that addresses that, you're confirming that a hypothesis is true, or you can get data, we can see if there's lead, and then your protocol works. I think you're onto something. And, so this is, I think this just kind of leads to the credibility that a lot of issues that we have that are health wise, whether it's chronic or acute, probably got into some type of poison, either acutely or it built up over time. And there was finally a point, straw breaks the camel's back, and your body just says, I can't do it anymore. And then the dysfunction has already, it's matured, it's ready. And then there's just that critical point where everything falls apart and then illness takes over. And so the solution for that is to, um, well, just detoxify. It gets a lot more than that. I say detoxify and renutrify. We've got to give our body the building blocks to rebuild, but it's all health really, really gets to. So we're going to go over a few other things here because there's still more ways the body can break down. Pesticides, we've already seen, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or any of the commercial class action lawsuits. Remember Bayer, what was it, $8 billion that they lost in lawsuits from Monsanto getting sued for having links to cancer, and Monsanto products, glyphosate and other pesticides, herbicides, they link to a lot more problems than just cancer. A lot more problems than just cancer. So I see in here too, after detoxing, does all this stuff go away? In the world that we live in, I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of everything. What we want is we want to get rid of enough things to where your body is able to um, kind of get a grip and manage everything. Unless you can get away to having clean air or clean water and clean food, you're always going to be dealing with this. This is just a 21st century reality. But can we get these down to a level where, on lab tests, they are well within the green or they are below detectable limit? Absolutely. Absolutely. The nuance in it, or the art in it, is working with someone who is able to put together a right protocol, and that would be, therapies, whether it's supplementation, um, diet, we'll say diet, rest, exercise, stress management, and we could say supplementation. I could throw in IVs and other modality, therapies as well. It's knowing what is going to work for your body and then putting it in the right sequence. Remember, we have to remember, or we have to learn, because a lot of us don't know this, that our bodies are incredibly intelligent. It is designed as such. And the only reason why it doesn't work the way it needs to is two things. It's overburdened with obstacles, which we collectively would call toxicities. And then it's under nutrified. It doesn't have enough of the building blocks in order to do the biochemistry, in order to, um, we'll just say in order to do the biological functions it needs. When we meet those two, we get a very efficient machine that is able to very well efficiently utilize all the resources that it has, and the way, the amount that it's able to heal is quite extraordinary. Most people, we don't get that because we're dealing with generations at this point of synthetic living, meaning we are so far removed from the earth. We don't exercise. We live almost in just like a digital prison now. Um, we don't move our bodies. Our food's fake. We're bombarded with EMFs. The water's poisoned. The air's poisoned. Jet fuel is, if I remember correctly, jet fuel is still 70% lead. Don't quote me on that one. They need to look that one up. But you have a lot of metal particulates that still are in jet fuel. And just for the fact that they're flying over the skies, you are putting that particulate in the air, which comes down. You mean you're going to breathe that in. It comes down and gets on the crop. So it eventually finds its way into two places: the soil and the water. And your water treatment facilities usually are using chemicals in order to try to kill bacteria, fungus, or parasites. It's not all of them are designed to strip the water of all of the contaminant particles, which would be anything from medications flushed down the toilets to environmental chemicals to heavy metals to radioactive particles that can come up from fracking or just come up from the deep earth, depending on where the water supply is. So, unless we're actively filtering our water at this point, we are drinking copious amounts, in some cases, of lead and other stuff. And that causes a lot of issues. I mean, that's where a lot of these things build up for us. And so if you're not being aware of that, and if you're not taking measures to clean that up yourself, it's going to be problematic. Now, there are ways, a Berkey or an Alexa Pure gravity fed water filter. I mean, that's a good place to start. It doesn't get everything, but it is a good place to start. Reverse osmosis is really good too. I like that. And water distillation. Water distillation is always 100% going to give you um, clean, sterile water. And you can choose to put sea salt or minerals back in. You can infuse it with fruit if you don't want to be drinking straight distilled water. There's a time and a place for drinking it. There's a time and a place for not drinking it. But it's certainly better than drinking your tap water. So, um, I want to bring this one up too because I was speaking with somebody about. It sounds like this person got into some chlorine toxicity, potentially from like industrial chlorine being used to clean water system or something like that, using it for water treatment. And there is an interesting correlation from chlorine to seizures, cognitive decline, completely tail spinning, and already imbalanced immune system. This person in particular has dealt with a lot of mold toxicity. And as we were talking about earlier, mold toxicity will absolutely mess with the nervous system. Another thing that I didn't mention that all these do is they can imbalance your immune system. And like, what do you mean by imbalance? Well, your immune system has many parts to it. One that we take a look at a lot of times that we call our TH1 and TH2 and TH17. So there's at least 17 of them, of these THs that are tied to our immune function. TH1 and TH2 usually we kind of act like a scale. We want them in balance. Um, Without getting too into it, when they get imbalanced, we can have issues with people having a lot of either allergic responses or severe sensitivities and intolerances to certain foods, certain chemicals. Um, and in this case, like, so when we come into contact with something like dairy or even something much stronger like chlorine, the body can have exaggerated immune responses because it's essentially immunocompromised and immunocompetent. Think about it like a water that is already filled to, or a glass that's already filled to the brim with water. You try to put more water in there, what happens? It's going to overflow. And this is kind of what the body does. It says, I'm already at full capacity. You hit me with an insult like this, straw that breaks the camel's back. The body is going to start having some severe reactions. And this is where things like seizures, rapid cognitive decline, are people that just, um, uh, whether it pass out, intense pain, that can happen get when you get a nice dose of a noxious substance like chlorine coming from the water supply. Now, an interesting one here. This is called iatrogenic disease. If you've never heard of iatrogenic, I don't blame you, but essentially is from the medical system or medical intervention. Historically, iatrogenic deaths are one of the top deaths year after year. I mean, God, no surprise. Death by the medical system. What happens when the therapy that the doc gives you actually creates the extra disease? So what this really kind of comes down to is you've probably heard polypharmacy. It's the idea that you get on a drug and that drug causes a side effect or creates another illness. And so you got to get a drug to manage that illness, but that creates its own illness. And now you got to get on a drug for that. We call that polypharmacy, and we can call that iatrogenic disease. So the treatment itself ends up creating more and more and more problems. That's just what I'm referring to there. So um, we can't leave out medications themselves because we know a lot of them. I'm not going to say all of them. There's a lot that have been made, but generally, medications have a toxicity associated with them in the liver, in the kidneys, somewhere in the body, because it is a synthetic substance that the body does not recognize, and it overrides or forces um, your body chemistry to alter. It's not like it necessarily plays nice. It's not God made. It's not an herb. It's not something that is natively biocompatible that works with your body. And so the body is smart and recognizes it as such, and they tend to cause problems. Again, I'm not going to say that for everything. There are certain synthetic compounds that I think have worked wonderfully. Um, Methylene blue, for example. Methylene blue does a lot of good for a lot of people. There's sometimes you shouldn't take it. Those um, that are on certain mood altering medications or have certain mood issues. But that is that's a case where a good synthetic substance really works well. And here's just a few other things. I mean, antidepressant induced mania. Well, I think most of us can say, when you get somebody on antidepressant, it's definitely got some rebound side effects. There's a reason why a lot of them have a black box warning, could induce suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation. That's much worse. Tardive dyskinesia, permanent irreversible movement disorders from antipsychotics, involuntary movements of the face, tongue, jaw, trunk. I need to look at that one. Might be a typo. And then drug induced lupus. Um, there's an interesting thing with that too. People getting that from high benzene toxicity as well. Um, that can come from gasoline, oil refinery. It can also come from chemical exposure too. Of high benzene can end up inducing things that look like lupus in people. So can Lyme, and then I think too there's an interesting correlation with some of these intracellular parasites like Lyme co-infections and lupus. We may save that one for another time. So this is kind of the part where I'm going to say, what do we do about it? If we suspect that we're not getting a proper label for our illness, we really don't know what's going on. I mean, the first place you'd think to start is, okay, well, look, can we do some diagnostics? Can we do some type of testing that can help us figure out what dysfunction we actually do have? And even better, if we can find what's driving it. You hear me talk all the time, total tox burden. I'm always going to say this is one of the best tests. If people have health challenges and they really want to get serious about their health, run a total tox burden. You will equivocally know, or you'll definitively know, are mold toxins a big issue for you? Are heavy metals a big issue for you? Are environmental chemicals a big issue for you? Because all the ones that we measure there too, we were able to see what they correlate with. Is this kidney toxic? What symptoms did these usually present in people? And so we're at least able to put a root cause to it. We can run a whole bunch of um, neurological or not neurological. Yes, neurological. We can run a lot of inflammatory markers. There's one test I like to use called a Neuralzoomer Plus for people that have Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, seizures, pandas, and autism. For the kids, we can actually identify some of the roots to see Do we have an infection of strep or something else that's actually driving this? And if we had to see that that's there, not only are we able to measure progress by, we can run these things in the future, but it also helps tell us what should our protocols look like? Are we just going to be doing like a blind shot and just giving you basic stuff for some drainage and put you through some cookie cutter protocol that kind of gets everything in the kitchen sink? I do those. Those have great success too. But when we're talking about some very serious things like neurological problems, or if you're wanting to stave off, um, dementia, Parkinson's, or other things, we can tell, are you heading in that direction already? Which again lets us do targeted stuff. Or we can tell you, hey, this is something that your body's handling really well. Um, I'm not, it helps put into perspective how concerned somebody should be about that. Knowledge is power. Infection testing, it's great. Parasite detection, it sucks. We know some that work better than others, but it's better to assume you got a pulse, you got a parasite. Let's do some cleansing. We can identify some of that stuff pretty reliably well with, I would say, muscle testing. That gets into a whole nother thing of energetic testing. Not the time tonight to talk about it, but just know if you try to run a test for parasites, chances are you're going to be disappointed because they have a little mechanism of being able to release enzymes that eat up their body so they leave no trace after they die. Makes it hard to identify them. But Lyme is a really good panel to run. We can test for, I forget how many co-infections. It's a ridiculous amount, but we can tell from Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Rickettsia, um, stuff that's associated like with alpha gal and getting people to be able to eat beef again. Because that stuff associated with Lyme is just terrible. Root cause treatment. Um, well, we don't treat anything. I don't like that word. I don't really think it makes sense. But you get the idea is we're addressing root causes. And again, it always goes back to it's really just a few things. It's either poisons, it's pathogens, it's EMF, or it's some type of trauma, internal conflicts. But it solves a problem for people. A lot of times people are gaslit, medical gaslighting. It's all in your head. It's not in your head. It's just that the doc didn't know what was wrong with you because he wasn't educated or taught that. He wasn't taught to think in that framework. Or there are financial incentives. Maybe the insurance won't let him run the labs to be able to do that. Maybe he has to consider if he would get sanctioned, suspended, or on probation from the medical board. Or maybe he doesn't have the autonomy to run his own practice, and he's part of a corporate group that's bought out, and he has to he has to do protocol to the T, and that doesn't include any of the things that we talked about, whether through testing. Um, or through looking at things through this lens, this philosophy that we did. It gives people renewed hope too. At least whenever you're able to finally get answers to something, then you can start putting a game plan. I don't think illnesses have to be forever. I look at them as just different severities of dysfunction. When we're able to bring the body back to a good homeostasis, the body knows how to solve all of the hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, or trillions of intricate pieces that we just have no idea how to manage. We do not create health in other people. The body heals. We just, as practitioners and as people, we just give it the tools. We help remove the obstacles and then we help give it the nutrients so that it can build. And then two, we have a paradigm shift. This is, this talk that we have, me doing this, it's all about trying to educate, to empower you that's listening to change that paradigm from one of not knowing what the body is, not knowing how to heal myself, not knowing what my diseases mean, how I got here. We're taking you from that to empowerment. I trying to make myself out of a job. That would be the best thing is for people to not have to need me or rely on me forever. That might make a good business model, but You don't want forever customers in this business because it means that what you're doing as a practitioner is not working. So I'm going to close this here, and we're going to go back to me, and we'll open it up and kind of banter a little bit. Um, because I do want to say we've outlined this issue. We do see that there's a lot of illnesses that kind of get labeled and thrown at us, but they don't ever tell us why is this happening. They don't ever answer why. What's the root? And then I would say to take it further. What's the game plan? If I'm sick right now, how do I get myself where I'm not sick? How can I make this a complete thing of the past where it does not affect me for the rest of my life moving forward, like it does for everybody else? Well, I mean, it's the right tools in the right sequence. We already talked about lab testing. Yeah, that's important. Um, it's not necessary, but it does help us identify the problem. And the next thing is to start doing the actual healing work yourself. I talk about drainage a lot, stuff to help flush your liver out, to flush your kidneys out, things to bind poisons, things to flush your intestines out, get your bowels moving. We do specialized liver cleanses. You've probably heard of the old methods of people doing enemas and coffee enemas. I mean, those things do work. They have their place. Uh, so supplementation takes a big part of this. Y'all know I have a online store. Links we put in the description. We've got individual supplements for everything from just good old vitamin C in a form that will knock your socks off to much more specialized formulas that are imprinted with frequencies that help work with resolving trauma within the body. That's really cool. We've got a bunch of parasite cleanses. We've got 1 month, 4 month DIY protocols for people that just want to do that, or if they're strapped for cash and say, "Hey, man, I don't have the money to get into testing. I don't have the money to do one-on-one with you. I just need you to tell me, just start here, work on this, and then tell me what to do next." We've got that everywhere. That's on our website, beyonddetox.com. And that links to our lab testing pages, that links to our online store. And I'll just make a quick comment too. I have access to thousands and thousands and thousands of different labs. I curate a lot of the labs that we put online simply for the sake of um, removing decision paralysis. We've got plenty of different labs. We can run standard blood work. We can do things. We can test for just about anything that you can imagine. So, if there's something that you've been toying with, you've been thinking, I wonder if this is for me. I've heard about this. Do y'all carry this? And do you think it would actually be worth my money? You can always reach out to us. I'll respond to stuff like that. There's a lot of labs out there that I think I don't want to say they're useless, but they have a very specific window for doing. And I'll just say one of them right now is food sensitivity panels. I don't like them. I don't think that they're that valuable unless we're dealing with some very specific strong gut issues. So you can save your money there and put it towards something a little bit better. But basic blood work, if we need to check some cardiovascular markers, things like homocysteine, apolipoprotein B, a lot of the COVID stuff to see, whether you got a clot shot or not. If you're worried about clotting, we want to see that. If we want to see oxidative DNA damage, if you're concerned about estrogen-driven cancers, we can measure stuff like that and say how bad this is and whatnot. We get your testosterone better. Again, we can do all that stuff. But, um, if you're gonna make an impact in your health, you actually have to do something. So, at the very least, work on your diet. RF Kennedy Jr., they finally inverted the food pyramid. I didn't think that they would necessarily do that. It's kinda like a South Park episode, but follow that food pyramid. I think that that's a really good recommendation. High quality fats, high quality proteins, a lot of vegetables, limit your carbs. Eat the carbs, eat the amount of carbs that you need in order to function. Some people need that sugar. Some people are built that way where they need more sugar or carbs than others. But if you do that, you work on making peace in your internal life, peace with your spouse, peace with your kids, peace with your work environment, and get out of very stressful, traumatizing relationships, whether that's professional, like your work, or in your own home. I say get spiritual, get right with God, crack open that Bible and actually start doing some study, spend time with the Creator. All of those things are going to bring peace into your body, and you can't out supplement stuff like you can't supplement stuff like that away. So we're going to go to the chat here because I see quite a few things that are popping up. So people always ask with a distiller, worry about mineral replacement. I don't worry about it. I tell you, if you're worried about it, take a pinch of sea salt, Himalayan salt, um, or you can make fruit infusions in there. There's also a electrolyte that I really like to use. And best of all, you can actually get this at Walmart. If you go to the food section and look like where the water flavorings are, it's not in the supplement section, it's in the food section. It's called dry water. And that is essentially freeze dried coconut and other fruits. They're natural, plant derived or food sources of electrolytes, and it works really well. And I even recommend that above some of our, physician formulations of like high potency supplemental mineral electrolytes. So you can get that and start dumping that in there. So, I don't worry so much about the distilled water. Distilled water has an affinity, or some doctors will say through some of their testing methods, more energetic testing methods, that it helps. Um, what's the word? I say it helps detox radioactive particles. All right, and somebody looked up trunk for us, abdomen, pelvis, and back. That's what I was thinking, but it's been a long day. It's been a long day. Let's see. We have anything here? Maybe repeat what you said. Oh, as far as muting, that we were just rambling, letting people come in just about what tonight's topic was going to be about. So y'all didn't miss any key bits of information there. See if we have anything else. Looks like I may have covered most everything in here. Yeah. But I will say, it's a really crazy world that we're living in. And it's just really sad when people now can't seem to trust or be able to um, get accurate information about what's happening inside of their body. I mean, it's no surprise. People are getting much, much, much sicker. Um, they're getting much sicker. They're getting much sicker younger. And the type of diseases were rare or were not even heard of, 100, years ago. So to say that it's genetic, which you do have plenty of people are trying to say it's genetic so they can end up selling you on gene changing. Um, you know, genes don't change that quickly. If you do believe in evolution, you got a big problem. Genes don't, because even according to that model that says genes change or evolve, they don't change that quickly. And we got to tuck that in and hide it in millions and millions of years in order to make any possible sense. So if the human body is not changing, that means the environment is changing. And we know for a fact it is. We can measure it so many different ways. Everything's poisoned, everything's fake, everything's turned upside down. It's bad. Hopefully, this information is starting to get inside of your head. Hopefully, it's starting to make sense. And hopefully, it's encouraging you to, start ultimately take health into your own hands. Um, I know there's a lot of tools. There's a lot of tools that people market. I say there are a lot of things that don't really impress me much when it comes to the natural health space. Simply because you do have a lot of predators, you do have a lot of folks that are hawking their wares, they're trying to sell you. Um, not snake oil. They're trying to sell you fish oil. And some of these tools are great. I'm not going to lie about it. But the thing is, you need to know what's going to work for you. And if you're going to know what works for you, you need to know what you're facing as far as your health challenges. And it's important. It's important to know that because when you don't have health, you don't have anything. I've been there before. Maybe one day I'll tell y'all all about, the nightmares that I've gone through because there's a reason that I do this. A lot of these things I'm telling you about, I've had personal experience with. So, I can tell you with some authority, some things that have worked really well, some things that haven't so much, either for me or a lot of the clients I work with. Um, but yeah, I don't want you guys to get into any type of dead ends or either with your health or get stuck in an endless cycle of buying the same supplement for uh, 15 years, thinking that it's doing something, only to find out that your worst fears come true. We see that a lot with older women with osteoporosis. They take a calcium thing forever, only to find out when we do some intensive bone um, markers with them, which we can do through blood and we can do through urine with our hormone panels to find out that their bones are just teared apart, they're breaking down, and then we do a total tox with them and see they have got mercury, they've got cesium, they've got uranium, they've got lead, they got cadmium, arsenic, glyphosate, atrazine, all of these poisons just sky high. Like, well, eh, that kind of makes sense. All of those things are robbing the nutrition out of your bones. Your bones are just tearing themselves down to put out these inflammatory fires. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So let's see if we've got anything else in here. Otherwise, I'm just going to be ranting all night. But you're right. People are getting prescribed more and more and more pills, and there's a cost to it, as we talked about earlier. It's going to tend to rob the body of nutrients. It's going to cause some type of irritation or toxicity to the organs that they're going to then have to, you know, all of these pills have to be metabolized. I mean, that's even true with a supplement. At least a supplement is stuff that we know is designed to work with the body and elicit a healing response, whether it's vitamins and minerals, you got to have those every day, or whether they're herbs that have a hormetic effect, hormesis, like it's a good stress that causes the body to respond um, with, a healing effect. Those all have to be metabolized. So what happens when you have a poison? Poison has to be metabolized too. Otherwise, it can cause great damage in the body. And so there is a cost to taking medications in terms of, what does it do to your body? Is it going to poison the liver a little bit? Is it going to irritate it? Is it going to damage tissues? Is it going to rob CoQ10 that your heart needs and then lead to cardiovascular or heart damage or heart dysfunction later? These are all things that we have to consider too. And so if we don't get the right label for an illness and we get put on the wrong medications, if you choose to go the medication route to manage your disease, it's not going to heal it. Or the intent is not to heal it. The intent is to manage it. And um, you better make sure that that label is correct. Nobody wants to go through cancer treatments only to find out they didn't have cancer. Only to find, you got chemoed and radiated only to find out, oops, it wasn't cancer, it was fungus. And you think I'm not joking about that either. I don't remember if it was a man named Doug Kaufman. His last name is Kaufman. And he had this series, pretty well done production too. And he's not the only one talking about it. He just kind of made like a production out of it. I think it was always is it fungus or is it mold or is it cancer was the name. That guy's answer to everything was It's always fungus. It's always fungal. It's always yeast. It's always mold. And it's a little bigger than that, but if you go and search that even just on YouTube, you'll find all these episodes and all this information. And that's what he spent a lot of time with showing was how a lot of times cancer and all these other illnesses turns out, oh, it was just mold all along. It was just fungus all along. So I would say, if you got nothing better to do on the weekend, go check out Kaufman. Is it Mold? I think it was called. Uh, yeah, and just see what you think about it. Well, I don't see any more questions here. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. Again, hope you guys got something out of it. If there is something that y'all want me to cover, feel free to email, reach out to me, let me know. We're glad to do this. We did a pretty good deep dive on mold, but I'm probably going to do a dedicated one on that. That's one that I think needs to be beat into. Like people need to know just how bad mold is because it's affecting everybody. So, parting statements. Everybody needs to tune in on January 30th at 7 o'clock here. My good friend, colleague, Dr. Brendan McLaughlin, he is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about autoimmune diseases, his time in the trenches with it, and his published works on, autoimmune and other things. He is a treasure trove of knowledge. He can get deep into the weeds with energetic stuff too, which, if we have time, we'll probe, we'll talk to him about that one. But I have a feeling we're going to have him on multiple times. But it's going to be a fun show, definitely. So make sure to tune in for that and try to bring in as many people as you can so we can send some love to him and also learn from him because he's a very very good resource that I want all of y'all to benefit from learning from. I've certainly benefited from him, myself, personally and professionally. So I'm glad to call him friend. I'm glad to be able to introduce him to y'all. So with that being said, y'all have a good night. Y'all have a good evening. I'll be back next week with some fun stuff. Have a good night, guys.